I live in a small home in a fairly decent neighborhood, and I also work from home as well. I have my office set up upstairs in a small room, with my desk right by a window that faces the front of the house. I liked being able to open it for fresh air, or have the view when it was nice out. This was as fall was just starting, so I pretty much had the window open all day. One regular weekday though, around noon, I was doing my usual work at my desk when I noticed something out the window. There was a person, a man, standing at the bottom of my driveway, not walking past it or stopping to tie a shoe or anything. He was just standing there and looking up at my house. I couldn't tell if he could see me in the window or not, but after only a few seconds of me looking at him, he walked away. I thought it was really strange, but that was about it. What else was I supposed to think or do? I continued with work. I did an occasional check out the window every now and again, but seeing nothing else, I wasn't too worried about it. The following day, I was on the same routine. I got to work and was pretty busy the whole day. I had a lot of video calls with my coworkers. During one of these calls, I spaced out and happened to glance out the window again. That man was there, standing in the same spot at the end of the driveway and looking up at the house just like he was before. Something about this time was 10 times more creepy and eerie. Why the hell was he back here? I must have stared off at him for a while, because one of my coworkers noticed I looked worried and asked if everything was okay. I said yeah and tried to refocus on the meeting. I kept looking back though. He was standing there for a minute, then I looked back again and he was gone. The rest of my workday felt to drag on. I couldn't stop thinking about this random guy looking up at my house. It was just so odd. When I got out of work, I went outside and walked around my driveway, looking for any reason for them to be looking up at my house like that. Everything looked normal. However, I did notice that the window of my office was visible and clear from where the man was standing, which means he could likely see me looking at him. I went back inside and made dinner. I had a call with my brother that night, and I mentioned it. He agreed it was odd, but said it was likely nothing. After getting off the phone, I sat down and watched TV, hoping to get my mind off of it. A couple hours passed. It was maybe 9 p.m. I had the show turned down because I was getting tired, but with the low volume, I was able to hear what I thought were footsteps outside my house. I jolted up from the couch and stared at the front door. The footsteps walked up, only stopping for a brief second, then walked away. I hurried over to the door and looked out the peephole. I could only faintly see a figure walking down to the road. Once they were gone, I opened the door. Immediately, I noticed a note taped to the back. It was short. It just said, "Pat, answer the door." I was not only confused, but horrified. How did they know my name, and what was the note even supposed to mean? They didn't even knock or stay long enough for me to have answered the door. Not that I would have anyway. This was enough for me to call the police. 2 officers came over, and I told them everything. Unfortunately, there wasn't all that much they could do though. They pretty much wrote it all down and said if something else happens, call them. It really didn't make me feel much better. I stayed up late that night, laying in bed, unable to sleep. I literally just laid there for hours, thinking about this man that was stalking my house and the eerie note he left. Then, at just before 2 a.m., a knock at the front door echoed through the otherwise silent house. My body froze up. The silence of the house was now deafening as I listened in fear. After a few seconds, they knocked again. My heart started beating faster. I got my phone and called 911. They sent officers right away, but the knocks continued the whole time I waited. Eerily, they never got louder or more rushed or aggressive. It was just the same knocking, over and over, echoing through the hallways of my home. The operator on the phone updated me that the cops were 2 minutes out, and just after that, there was a longer pause between the knocking. 15 seconds, then 30, then a whole minute passed. When the officers showed up, nobody was at the door. They were too late. Again, I told them what happened, and they seemed to take it a little bit more seriously this time, but it still wasn't enough for them to do anything about it. They said they would have an officer patrol around here for the next couple weeks. Those weeks came and went, and the man never came back up to my door or to the end of the driveway, at least from what I know. It's been months later now, and still nothing else. It still scares the hell out of me though. The thought of the creepy note telling me to answer the door, and then there being knocking at 2 a.m. is just terrifying. Then there's also the thought of them coming back, lingering in my head. I don't know what they wanted, who they were, or if they're truly gone for good. Recently, there's been an enormous data breach. 2.7 billion victims' personal information and social security numbers were stolen. This stolen personal data could allow people to gain access to your financial accounts, or even steal your identity. So now it's more important than ever to take extra measures to ensure your security. There's really no better time than now to take advantage of Aura's security service. I've been regularly sponsored by Aura for over a year now, and it's because I honestly believe their service is amazing. Aura provides continuous monitoring of your personal data and resolves any potential threats that may come up, while also preventing future threats. They also make it incredibly easy for you to use and understand everything going on with your data. With their free trial, you'll be able to have Aura scan and remove your personal data from all over the internet, including scam centers, the dark web, data brokers, and hackers. After this, Aura will set up continuous monitoring on all of your data, ensuring any issues can be resolved rapidly by notifying you the instant something comes up. When I had first signed up, Aura immediately found dozens of places across the internet that already had my personal data, including my full name and address. In just a couple minutes, Aura cleared all of it. Especially in times like these, with huge data breaches and scams happening so often, having peace of mind knowing Aura is protecting your information is above anything. By using aura.com/whispered or scanning the QR code, you can get a completely free 14-day trial, allowing you to see if your personal data has been leaked, remove that data from multiple large platforms, and securely monitor your personal identity. I highly recommend using this opportunity to find any leaked info and ensure it is taken care of and secured. Thank you again to Aura for sponsoring this portion of today's video. This was when I was a freshman in high school. The town I lived in was small, and I guess you could say pretty old-fashioned compared to places nowadays. It was very woodsy all around, and the buildings and houses weren't so compacted together. My home was out in the woods. My parents had a decent amount of land, and my dad had built the place with his dad. Anyway, it didn't have a real road or a driveway. It was more of a dirt trail, so the school buses didn't have a stop at our place. I'd either have to walk a mile to my friend's house to get picked up, or just walk the extra distance straight to school. Usually, I just walk all the way to school. This was a typical day, as far as I could tell. I was walking down the trail from my home, enjoying the calm morning sounds of the woods, when I spotted a car up ahead. It wasn't my parents' car, or anyone else's that I knew, and it was just parked right on the trail. This trail only led to and from the house. so someone being on here was unusual. I don't know if I'd ever seen a random car here at all before this. I felt kind of uncomfortable having to pass it. There was a woman inside. She looked 35 or 40, with dark circles under her eyes and shaggy black hair. She glanced at me, but I just looked down. I could feel her eyes on me as I walked past, though. I picked up the pace and got to school. At the dinner table that night, I mentioned it to my parents, asking who it was and why they were there. Both of them looked worried and confused. They told me the woman must have just gotten lost and I shouldn't worry about it, but I could see the worry in their eyes. They dropped me off at school for the next week, which was odd because they both started work early, like 6 a.m., so they must have called in late for the entire week just to drop me off. Honestly, I thought that it was an overreaction, as I felt I was old enough to handle myself, but I knew my parents were just being safe. On Monday morning of the following week, I packed up my book bag and started walking. During the last week that I'd been dropped off, we never saw the woman or the car, so I really wasn't worried at all anymore. However, this time, when I got to that same spot in the woods, she was there again, sitting in her car, watching me. I had a mini heart attack. This was too much to be a coincidence, showing up twice on the trail that was basically our driveway, sitting in the same spot, and only showing up when I was walking alone. I made the decision to cut through the woods instead of walking past her again. I took a few steps off the trail, but immediately the woman noticed. She turned her car on and drove up closer to me. I pretended to ignore her, walking faster into the woods. I heard her car door open and her footsteps crunching on the leaves behind me. But then she called out my name, like my full name, in this eerily calm and loving voice. I turned my head and looked at her. She had this dead stare and blank, expressionless face. Her eyes were tired and heavy, and she had this sickly look. I sprinted away, and after losing sight of her, I circled back through the woods to my house, where I called my parents. They called the police and came home right away. What I didn't expect was my parents to know exactly who the woman was. It was my dad's ex-wife from almost 2 decades ago. Apparently, she'd had mental health issues for a while and would have these horrifying episodes where she'd get obsessed with something and do disturbing things. The day I told them I saw her, my parents reported it to the police, knowing it had to be her. Police failed to do anything about it though, only checking up on her and saying she seemed normal. For that whole week though, she had been stalking our house, knowing that every time my parents left for work early, it meant I would be walking alone to school. My parents never told me what happened to her after this, or what she was trying to do to me, or why she was doing any of it. Hopefully, nothing like that happens again. This was in 2019. I worked at a grocery store, usually closing shifts, and I lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment. We had a lot of regulars at our store, customers that would come in all the time, and usually around the same time as well. One of these customers was a guy that came in right before closing a couple times a week. Nobody knew his name, but everybody knew of him because nobody liked customers that came in 10 minutes before the store closed. Usually being the only cashier, I'd be the one interacting with him. He was always a bit strange. He didn't talk much and always had a tired look on his face. This night, he came in as he always did, right before closing, grabbing a couple things and coming up to the register. I scanned everything, he paid, and he left. We didn't exchange any words aside from a simple greeting. 10 minutes later, I closed down the register and spent a few minutes cleaning up, clocking out and leaving at 10:15. As I walked out to my car, I noticed the man was still in the parking lot. He was standing awkwardly outside of his car with his hands at his side, just looking at the store. I got in my car and went home. I didn't have work the following day, so I stayed up a bit later than usual. I didn't get into bed until probably 1 a.m. Only moments after getting under the covers though, a bright light glared into my bedroom through one of the windows. I thought it was a neighbor pulling in, so I didn't really care about it. After a second, the light shut off, which unconsciously confirmed to me that it was just headlights. I fell asleep only a couple minutes later. I woke up in the night to what I thought was my phone ringing. The way I woke up, half asleep and in the middle of a dream, it was hard to tell what was real and what wasn't. I rubbed my eyes and tapped my phone on the nightstand. It was blank. No messages or phone calls came in. I wasn't sure what to think. I was going to just ignore it and go back to sleep, as I wasn't even fully awake yet to begin with. But the slightest thing caught my eye as I rolled back over. The bedroom door was barely cracked open, not even enough to let any light in or anything. It was just uneven with the door frame, not latched shut. I always closed the door to my room, so seeing it not fully shut immediately woke me up. I got out of bed and walked over, pushing it closed to see if maybe it was stuck for some reason. It smoothly latched into the door frame, just like it always did, so there was no way I'd mistakenly left it open. I felt my body get shaky. My heart was pounding. But even with everything pointing otherwise, I still tried to convince myself that this was somehow nothing. I tried to think of any possible way that this was something to not worry about. But my mind thought back to the light I saw before falling asleep. I walked over to the window and peeked through the blinds. There was a car parked in my driveway. I could only see the back half of it, but I instantly felt a rush of panic. Who was at my house, and was someone inside with me? I hurried over to the door again and flicked on the lights. I stood there by the door, panicking and thinking, realizing I should call 911 just to be safe. I looked at the nightstand that my phone was on, and just before I started to walk over there, I saw an eye looking back at me from a crack in the closet. My body shook and I let out a gasp, then spun around and sprinted out of my house. By the time I found a neighbor that would answer their door and call the police for me, at least 15 minutes had gone by already. The car in my driveway was still there when officers showed up, but the man was gone. It didn't take long for them to use the car to track him down though, and I felt nauseous when it turned out to be the man from the grocery store. His reasonings for everything didn't make any sense, but it was clear he'd had his eye on me for a while now, and he was not mentally well. I think the only reason I'd woken up that night was because the man's phone rang while he was hiding, and he silenced it just as I woke up. If not for that, I don't know what would have happened to me, or if I'd even be here right now.